Hello children, welcome back to your English class. Hope you have gone through the first part of the third chapter, Henry, and read the chapter thoroughly and understood the first part. In the first part, it said that one day when grandfather was going out to visit his friend, he came across a chameleon where people were trying to create trouble to it. So grandfather brings him home and tries to save his life. So let's see what happens in the next part. Henry did not cause trouble in our house, but he did create something like a riot. In the nursery school down the road, it happens like this. So Henry was not very troublesome at home, but he did create a riot. Riot means situation where a group of people make a lot of noise and create trouble. So he was creating some noise and trouble sort of. When the papayas in our garden were ripe, grandmother usually sent a basket of them to her friend, Mrs. Ghosh, who was the principal of the nursery school. On this occasion, Henry managed to smuggle himself into the basket of papayas. Smuggle means secretly move secretly. When no one was looking, the gardener dutifully carried the papayas across the school and took them into Mrs. Ghosh's office. So here what happened, when in the grandfather's garden, when the papayas were ripe, grandma usually used to send some papayas to Mrs. Ghosh, who was her friend and a principal of the nursery school. So when she put these papayas in the basket, Henry managed to smuggle into it. He managed to secretly go into the basket. And the gardener just uh, following the instructions of the grandma, he took the basket and he took them to Mrs. Ghosh's office. When Mrs. Ghosh came in after making her rounds, she began admiring and examining the papayas. Out popped Henry. Mrs. Ghosh screamed. Henry would probably have liked to blush a deep red, but he turned a bright green instead, as that was the color of the papayas. So when Mrs. Ghosh was coming back from her round in the school, she came to her office and started looking at the papayas and admiring them and examining them. And suddenly, Henry jumped out from the basket. Mrs. Ghosh screamed, shouted. But by the time she shouted, Henry should have turned into deep red color because Henry also was scared. But instead, he turned to a bright green color because chameleons are meant to camouflage themselves as per the surroundings. They change their color as per the surroundings. So since the papayas were green in color, the chameleon also turned himself into green color, the color of the papayas. Mrs. Ghosh's assistant, Miss Daniels, rushed in, took one look at the chameleon, and joined in the screaming. Henry took fright and fled from the office, running down the corridor and into one of the classrooms. There he climbed on a desk while the children ran in all directions, some to get away from Henry, some to catch him, but Henry made his exit through a window and disappeared into the garden. Grandmother heard all about the incident from Mrs. Ghosh, but did not tell her that the chameleon was ours. I did not think Henry would find his way back to us because the school was 3 houses away, but 3 days later I found him sunning himself on the garden wall and he readily accepted some food from my hand. So after Mrs. Ghosh saw the chameleon, she was shouting. So her assistant, Mrs. Daniels, rushed into her room and took a look at the chameleon, and she also joined Mrs. Ghosh in screaming. Henry was frightened. He got scared and fled from the office. Fled means he ran away from the office and he went into one of the classrooms. There he climbed on the desk and the children got disturbed. They started running in different directions. Some running away from the chameleon, some went to catch him, but somehow the chameleon could exit or could move out of the classroom through a window and he disappeared into the garden. Now this story Mrs. Ghosh, the nursery school principal, was telling the grandma, but grandma never told her that the chameleon was hers, and she thought that she could never see the chameleon again because uh, her house was 3 houses away from the school. But after some days or 3 days later, again she saw the chameleon sunning himself, soaking up sunlight on the garden wall. And when she saw him, she gave him some food, and he readily accepted the food from my hand, grandma's hand. Here we conclude this chapter. I hope you have understood the chapter thoroughly. Read the second part of the chapter twice, underline all the difficult words, and write it down in your notebook. Make 5 fill in the blanks from the textbook, 5 who said to whom from the textbook, and 5 opposite words from the textbook, and write it down in your notebook. And in the end of the video, I will be attaching the RTC, that is reference to context, and read, reflect, and write question answers along with this video. Until then, take care and stay safe.